After I started playing Day of Infamy, my life went on pause. I'm not going to say exactly how much playtime I logged in 2 weeks, but when I said in my last video that I played an unhealthy amount of this game, I wasn't kidding. So, I decided to lay off gaming for a while, and after receiving an unreasonably high offer for my 6-year-old graphics card, thanks to the recent surge of currency mining, I decided to go all in and sell up. In an act of what I'm coining the NoFrag challenge, which by the way has no affiliation to the NoFap challenge. Moving on, I've got to say, it's an interesting process. During the first day when I'd normally be fragging, I was really bored, I gotta admit. But I refused to do anything remotely productive. So I eventually ended up resorting to playing on an Xbox One simply out of sheer desperation. Over the next few days I couldn't really care less for gaming, honestly. Probably because 8th generation consoles offerings are pretty lame, so instead I just started doing, well, productive things really, such as finishing outstanding jobs, and I even started to read a few self-help books. During my NoFrag challenge, I remembered that my Intel CPU had a basic graphics chip built into it, and I kind of became curious about how rubbish it actually was. I knew it was kind of garbage for gaming, but I wanted to see how it performed. So I decided to load up a few games that I thought were somewhat non-demanding, just to see how it would hold up, expecting unplayable frame rates at really low resolutions. First of all, let's take a quick look at the specs. The chip itself is an Intel HD 530 graphics chip, which is part of the CPU die itself. It features 24 execution units with 8 shaders each, totaling 192 shader units. It has a base clock of around 350 MHz and boosts all the way up to 1150 MHz. With my overclock in place, it boosts to around 1300 MHz, and in terms of power draw, this beast of a chip has a max power draw of just 15 watts. So on paper, things aren't looking too great for the 530, to put it mildly. However, the little chip that could has a secret weapon, and that weapon is that it's a PC graphics chip. Being able to run PC software lets you have total control over how you want your games to run. So naturally, it all comes down to what your priorities are and whether you prefer frame rate or pretty pixels. The first game I tested, maybe unsurprisingly, was Day of Infamy. Now it runs on a source engine, and as we all know, games running on a source engine tend to run pretty well even on pretty potato hardware. However, DOI is actually one of the most demanding source engine games at least I've ever seen, so it makes it a kind of interesting juxtaposition. Now I value frame rate above all else, with resolution as a secondary priority. So the first test was with all graphics on their lowest setting, running at 1080p, and it fared surprisingly well. Some maps at their busiest can dip into the mid-40s, however 1080p 60fps was an attainable goal, if you didn't mind some maps frequently dipping below that 60fps target. But that's not good enough for me. I wanted 120fps to use with the 120Hz display that I had hooked up. Now there is a strange quirk with the 530, and that's if you want 120Hz above 1024 by 768, you need a DisplayPort on your motherboard, which is strange as very few motherboards actually have a DisplayPort. Since I didn't have a DisplayPort, that's exactly what I resorted to. A whopping 1024 by 768 running at 120Hz, and with Day of Infamy, to my surprise, with the little chip that could, it had no problem staying above 80 frames per second even in the most intense areas of maps, and usually hitting the 120 frames per second target for most of the time. I was kind of blown away with these results, considering I wasn't even expecting this game to boot without crashing, let alone be playing it at 120Hz. So I tried another undemanding title, being Halo 2 Vista. Not only was I able to hold a 60 frames per second lock, but also rendering the full scene at a full fat 1080p. This was probably the biggest surprise out of the 3 games, and I'm currently now working my way through a legendary playthrough, enjoying the delights of one-hit kill jackal snipers. The last game I tested out was Deus Ex Human Revolution, which was definitely a step up from the other 2 games, both in terms of engine technology and general scene complexity, with detailed renditions of large city blocks and interiors. 1080p 30 frames per second was an option, but who the hell would choose to play at 30fps, right? So I dropped all settings to low and rendered the scene at the lovely 1024 by 768, and enjoyed over 60fps gameplay pretty much at all times at 120Hz. A couple of things I want to add is that there are sometimes graphics bugs with certain games, such as in Day of Infamy, some maps were a lot darker, which made them hard to play, and some textures were a little bit glitchy in Halo 2. It mainly affected titles running on older engines, but I also don't believe that Intel expect too many people to be using this chip for any serious gaming, so they probably don't plough as much resources into their drivers as dedicated graphics chip vendors such as AMD or Nvidia do, especially optimizing for old games such as Halo 2 Vista. To come back to the original point of basically not gaming for a while or getting rid of your gaming hardware, it has definitely made me appreciate having a PC fast enough to run modern games at the settings I want. As before doing this process, I basically just took my PC for granted, and like I said, I was starting to game too much, so taking a break helped me to do some maybe more productive things with my time that I was putting off. So if you feel like you are gaming too much, instead of easing off gently, I say stop gaming completely and just see what happens. You might be surprised. Moving forward, as fun as it was playing around with the HD 530, this isn't the long-term solution for this channel. I will be getting a new GPU, hopefully in August, assuming everything goes well with RX Vega, so expect to see normal quality gameplay return soon. If you enjoyed the video, leave a like and subscribe if you want to see more. If you want to be an even more awesome supporter, you can chuck a few dollars my way on Patreon via the link in the description. Every little helps, no matter how big or small you contribute, and as I'm sure most of you guys are aware, the equipment necessary to make these kinds of videos and all the rest of it, it all adds up pretty quickly, so I appreciate anything you can spare. But for now, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.